Hi everyone, I'm Scott. Thanks for clicking on my channel. It's called CineRam. I talk about films and filmmakers and stuff like that for the most part here. And I wanted to start a new series today. I had planned for this to be a series that I would be adding to throughout the course of this year. The year is 25% over already, so I better get started. I've been watching a lot of reaction videos since the pandemic and people have been quarantined. There's been an uptick in that, I feel. The first reaction videos I remember seeing are of episodes of Game of Thrones, people reacting with shock to the Red Wedding and other things like that. And then people started reacting to big new movie trailers like for The Force Awakens or Infinity War, things like that, and they're still doing it, still, recording themselves reacting to stuff like that. Or it's, vintage music videos or, just funny stuff on the web, things like that. But since since people have a lot of free time on their hands and are stuck at home, they've been reacting to things that they have sort of ignored for a while, movies that people really like. That have been spoken about a lot and written about a lot, but they just never got around to seeing. And so they're sitting down and reacting to entire feature films. But this isn't something new to me. I've been watching Tamara Chambers and her series Tamara's Never Seen since it got started. I think it was around 2015 that she started doing this. She was talking about how when she was growing up, she was really into theater. And though she saw some films, a few of them, a lot of them she missed out on. And so she would basically post a video a week in which she watches some movie that everyone has said that she has to check out and reacted to that and given her thoughts on it. And I want to do something like that. A good friend of mine, Luke, whose channel is called Razor Wire Reviews, he recommended a couple of channels to me, and then I discovered a few more. And, I see people reacting to feature films practically every day of the week now, which is fun. It's nice to see the sort of condensed version of the movie along with them. Now, Tamara Chambers, she didn't actually record herself watching the movies, but she just, gives her reaction afterwards, and that's what I'm going to be doing because, quite frankly, I don't want to spend that much time editing. I mean, I don't spend any time editing now, and I'm not going to spend hours and days going through the footage of a movie to edit it down for YouTube. So the question was, what am I going to react to? A lot of the movies that they've been reacting to, the people that I've been watching, are movies that I've already seen, I'm already familiar with. So I thought, okay, if I go back further, earlier than the 80s, and, look at some of those classic films that I haven't seen before, but where should I start? Should I focus on a particular genre? Should I focus on a particular director, like I have in the past? Who would that be? Who would I focus on? Who is someone who is acclaimed and influential and has, a resume full of classics that I haven't really gotten to most of? And then I realized, Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock is a director who's hugely influential. He's got, his name inspires its own adjective, Hitchcockian. He's been called the master of suspense on the whole. He specialized in thrillers. And his career was pretty long, too. He actually started out in the silent era, and his last film was released in 1976. So that was a long, long career. Now, I wasn't going to watch all of his movies. Like I said, most of the people who do reaction videos focus on movies that are well known and acclaimed, but they just hadn't gotten around to. So I thought it would be best, instead of going through his entire resume, to focus on, the thrillers that he's known for. And if I recognized a title, that I would pick that, and I'd also pick a few others. So I ended up going through his CV and finding 30 titles that I wanted to watch and give my thoughts on. I would like to do one video a week, at least, possibly more, but that'll take me a good 7.5 months to get through those 30 movies. And out of these 30, prior to the start of the series, I had only seen 6 of them. And most of them I had seen a long, long, long time ago, when I was a kid. They were more family-friendly than the typical 80s thriller with its blood and sex and swearing and what have you. So my parents generally considered the Hitchcock thrillers to be safe for, a young kid like myself. Most recently, the film that I saw of his was The Birds, And I saw that just last year. It happened to be on TV. More recently, I saw Rope a number of times. As of right now, of the films that I've seen of his, Rope would probably be my favorite. But that leaves quite a lot that I have not seen. And so I'm going to be taking them one or two at a time and talking about them, watching them in turn, and watching them in chronological order. The first title that I recognized on this list was The 39 Steps. But prior to that, the year earlier, Hitchcock directed a movie called The Man Who Knew Too Much, which is not the same as The Man Who Knew Too Much in the 50s, starring James Stewart. Hitchcock directed two movies called The Man Who Knew Too Much. So I said, okay, just for the sake of being able to compare the two Mans Who Knew Too Much, I would watch them both. So that was the first one that I saw. The Man Who Knew Too Much came out in 1934, and its remake with James Stewart and Doris Day came out in 1956. Most of the actors I'm not familiar with in this film, except for Peter Lorre as Abbott. Peter Lorre is well known as a guy who plays villains and creeps, who played villains and creeps. He was in a couple films with Humphrey Bogart. He was in Arsenic and Old Lace. He's famously the main character in the Fritz Lang thriller M. And more recently, he was in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Kirk Douglas. That's a Disney adventure. So yeah. The main character, Bob Lawrence, is played by an actor named Leslie Banks, and his wife Jill is played by Edna Best. Leslie Banks played Count Zaroff in The Most Dangerous Game, which is a 1924 film. And Jill Lawrence appeared in Swiss Family Robinson after she was in this Hitchcock film. That movie came out in 1940. Their daughter, Betty, who is kidnapped during the course of the movie, is played by an actress named Nova Pilbeam. And she wanted to make another Hitchcock movie called Young and Innocent. That was in 1937, so just a couple years after The Man Who Knew Too Much came out. Now, as I said, this movie involves a kidnapping. Betty is kidnapped because her parents have come into some confidential information that some bad guys want to secure for themselves. So this movie takes place, I think, in Switzerland, and it starts off with Edna, the mother, competing in a shooting competition, skeet shooting. She loses to her opponent, and her opponent turns out to be one of the bad guys, and they basically are sort of blackmailed into telling the police that their daughter is just visiting a relative and that she hasn't been kidnapped because they need the information back and they don't want police interference. There's a culmination of events involving an attempted assassination in a theater, and I haven't called this movie The 39 Steps by accident, have I? I just want to make sure that. The Man Who Knew Too Much, that's the name of this movie. Just had a brain meltdown for a minute there. There's an attempted assassination in a theater that gets foiled, and then unusually for Hitchcock, at least from the films that I'm aware of, there's a big shootout in the street. The bad guys, including Peter Lorre, are holed up in a building, and they're shooting at the police that have gathered outside. They're shooting at the windows. The cops are shooting back. Normally in Hitchcock films, the ones that I'm aware of, guns are used rather sparingly. There's guns in the movies, but they're only fired once in a while, so that I thought was kind of unusual. I have to wonder whether or not Bong Joon-ho, who directed Parasite, might have taken some inspiration from this film for his earlier film called The Host. Because there's sort of a last-minute save at the end of this movie that reminded me quite a lot of the last-minute save at the end of The Host as well. So this was a good movie, you know, it was interesting. I was a little confused as to the relationship of the characters. I watched the Criterion Blu-ray of it, but the audio wasn't great, so I missed some dialogue, I think. I was confused as to whether or not Peter Lorre was an acquaintance of the family prior to the events of the movie, but it turned out that that was not the case. Anyway, so I enjoyed this movie. Might not end up being one of my favorites, but I did like it. And I think probably the most Hitchcockian moment in this movie was a long tracking shot during the theater sequence when the assassination is about to happen. It goes from one opera box down to the wife who's sitting amongst the front rows in the theater and then over to the side to another opera box. It's a nice grandiose camera move that I thought was really cool. So that was the first Hitchcock film that I saw for this series, and the second one was, of course, The 39 Steps, which came out a year later. Now, prior to seeing this movie, I had read a film book in which there was a photograph, a black and white photograph, of an old film in which there's a man with a glass of milk on a tray, and he's heading up a staircase to the upper floor. And I thought this was a still from the 39 Steps, because there could be 39 steps in this staircase. And what's in that milk? Is it poisoned? Is he trying to kill his wife or drug her? Something nefarious is going on here. Well, it was completely wrong. Whatever that movie is, it's not the 39 Steps, because there's no staircase with 39 steps in this movie called the 39 Steps. As I said, this movie came out in 1935. The main character is played by Robert Donat, and he was in The Count of Monte Cristo in 1934. The Citadel in 1938, and Goodbye Mr. Chips in 1939. One of the other main characters is Pamela, played by an actress named Madeleine Carroll. And at first I thought that she was just going to be an incidental character, but it turns out she's one of the main characters. If I were more familiar with actors of that period, I might have recognized her, but I didn't, so I thought she was just kind of just an incidental character. What happens in this movie is there's another bit of information that's being transferred basically by some bad people out of the country, and there's a woman who is a spy working for an intelligence agency whose job it is to get the information, keep the information safe, keep it out of the hands of the bad guys. And she happens to run into Richard Hannay, who's the main character, but then she shortly gets killed after telling him a little bit about what she's trying to do. And so Richard Hannay takes it on himself to try and keep the information out of the bad guy's hands. He travels to a location where he believes that this woman was going to meet her contact for help, but as it turns out, the name on this sheet of paper was actually the head of the bad guys, and so he sort of gives the game away right away. He ends up escaping. He goes to the cops, but the cops don't believe him, and then some other bad guys showing up pose as cops, and they arrest him along with a woman who he was hoping would help him when he was riding on a train, but she ended up, ratting on him. And they end up handcuffed together, running around through the countryside, trying to avoid being caught, trying to figure out what to do next and where they can go to alert authorities that are going to do something about this information. Peggy Ashcroft, Margaret. I made a note here about an actress who won an Oscar for Passage to India in the 80s. And she's also in this movie, but unfortunately I can't remember what her character was doing. Peggy Ashcroft played a character named Margaret. Unfortunately, they run into a whole series of characters. And I have to say, probably the best part of this movie was a scene in which Richard Hannay is trying to avoid being captured either by the cops or the bad guys. And he stumbles into a political meeting, and he's mistaken for some kind of business leader who's going to be introducing this candidate and endorsing him and saying what a great guy he is. And so to avoid being captured, he goes up on stage and sits in this chair, and then he's called to give a speech endorsing this candidate, and he doesn't know the guy, never met him, doesn't know anything about these people, but he gets up and he starts talking about how grateful he is to be asked unexpectedly to speak in front of this audience, and he's so glad to be here, and blah, 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 this and that, and he speaks in very vague terms about things that are true, but the way he's phrasing them makes the audience take it completely the wrong way. They don't understand the situation that he's in, and that's kind of an amusing scene right there. I'm just trying to think about any other particular set pieces. There's a sequence that takes place on a train. There's a whole bunch of sequences where Richard and Pamela are basically hiding out. And there's another scene that takes place in the theater, just like in The Man Who Knew Too Much. I like this movie, I guess, a little bit more than The Man Who Knew Too Much. But I don't know, I have to sort of look at the whole thing to decide if either of these are a favorite of mine. I actually saw both of these films a number of weeks ago, but there's just been a lot of stuff that's sort of preventing me from making a video until now. We had a big blizzard, but that was weeks ago, and after that, after dealing with all that mess, it's just something that I hadn't gotten around to until now. So those are the first two Hitchcock movies that I've seen for this series. And I think I'll do one movie per video thereafter, but I may end up doing two, depending on whether or not I think that films go together. Anyway, it's high time I got started on this, and I'll be, of course, making a playlist with all these videos, so that'll be easy for you to find the others if you care to. Thanks very much for watching, and if you'd like to check out my Facebook page for this channel. It's the easiest place to find new videos of mine. You could subscribe, obviously, to my channel, you know, but the subscription inboxes don't always have the most current videos on low-viewed channels like mine. So going to my Facebook page, where I share those videos, is a great place to see the new ones. You don't even have to like the page, you know, just bookmark it. Or bookmark, you know, my channel, of course, you could do that too, whichever is easiest for you. Thanks very much for watching, and the next movie that I'll be doing in my Hitchcock series is The Lady Vanishes. I'll see you then.